The order, of which I may be the last member, by tradition, came into existence after the last great cataclysm or catastrophe which affected the world.
What's up, guys? That opening clip was from the last Druid documentary. Hopefully I didn't get copyrighted and have to go back and read the transcript. And when the guy's got birds eating out of his hand, that's a little bit of street cred that he's got some Druid going on. We'll get back to him in a minute. I'm going to be going through a lot of stuff, so there will be a chronology in the description and comments if you want to skip a section. But two things I'm going to show basically beyond a shadow of a doubt are that the so-called fall of the Roman Empire had a lot more to do with the Earth run amuckus cycle than it did with Alaric and the sack of Rome. And that 536 AD, the worst year ever to be alive, is a date that historians have recently agreed to attribute all this to, and the timeline's been messed with. I'll do my best to list sources as we go. Two documentaries that I will be quoting from are shown here on the screen. These are professionally produced. It's not some random person that says, I heard this. And I'll start with their opener to give you a basic idea of what was going on. In the 6th century, something terrifying happened to the world's climate. Something nobody could understand. The sun began to go dark, rain the color of blood poured from the skies, clouds of fine dust enveloped the earth, and winter gripped the land for 2 years. Then came drought, famine, and the bubonic, There's certain words I don't want to say and get back in the doghouse. But whole cities were wiped out, civilizations crumbled, and nobody knows why. It's been generally accepted for a long time that a volcano was the cause of all of this. But I've got some pretty credible sources that are saying that all of this came from the sky. When you look at the old woodcuts and paintings, the clouds and lightning are not allegorical. It got really cold and there were bad electrical storms. You even see the houses on fire in the background. Now, this woodcut is from the 14th century Black D, but 536 AD and the 14th century events are so identical, one starts to wonder if they're the same event. Now, our friend the last Druid here says that his order began 3,000 years ago, which roughly lines up with the Bronze Age collapse, the biblical Exodus. And listen to how he describes the events if they'll let me play it.
Now, with these great and terrible impacts on the Earth by great electrical storms being caught up in the tails of meteors or showers of meteorites, civilization as we know it was totally destroyed.
He goes on to say that if you look at the great megalithic complexes in Ireland, what we would call the dolmens, you'll see that what are described as passage graves are really fallout shelters. And I'll bet you whatever you want to bet that the cliff dwellings out west are there for the same purpose. I've been out here to Mesa Verde and then Canyon of the Ancients nearby. And Mesa Verde is on top of a huge mountain that is hard to get up to. I'm talking, it would take a couple days walking up from the valley below. And then these cliff dwellings are 50, 60 feet up from the small canyons that lead into them. They're very hard to get to. They're nowhere near a water source, and they went through a lot of trouble to have something really solid above their heads. And the official dating even says that they're abandoned right at the 1300s cycle. It looks to me like the people were living down in the Montezuma Valley and then needed to take shelter and went up there. And it was just a temporary, 20, 30 years, who knows? How long does it take before you're convinced the sky isn't going to fall on you? So he could be talking about the late Bronze Age collapse or the 536 AD event, but he describes fiery meteors in the sky, a meteor storm, and also great electrical storms. So let's look at some mythology, and they tell the exact same story. Now, everybody's heard of Zeus's thunderbolt, the cosmic thunderbolt. So I'm not going to go into too much detail since he's of the old Gaelic order. Let's start with Irish mythology. And we have Lugh, the king of the Tuatha De Danann. He is a solar deity, and wouldn't you know it, he has several magical possessions. He wields an unstoppable fiery spear and a sling stone. And the official interpretation of mythology is just absolutely atrocious. I mean, to me, it looks plain as day, but, they say, oh, well, it's signifying him defeating the night. And they do the same with all mythology. He is a solar deity, which means he's up in the sky. He's got a fiery spear and throwing stones down at people. I mean, am I crazy here? The Aztec war god Huitzilopochtli. He also has a formidable weapon, a fire serpent, which is actually a ray of the sun. So plasma and fire in the heavens. And it says that he chopped up Coyolxauhqui, which is the moon goddess, into several large chunks and lobbed her down the side of the mountain. So the exact same story. Fire and rocks coming down from above. Even in Hebrew tradition, the name seraphim literally means fire serpent. So I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of what really goes on, and we'll get to the scientific papers concerning this in a second. But after all the fireworks in 536 AD, the Japanese king wrote, "Food is the basis of the empire. Yellow gold and 10,000 strings of cash cannot cure hunger. What avails 1,000 boxes of pearls to him who is starving of cold?" In the chronicles of Nanxi, southern China, records show yellow dust rain down like snow. It could be scooped up in handfuls. And that's not snow you're looking at, that is ash. And if you think about the bigger consequences of this, anybody who is relying on a creek or a river to get their water is basically done. That water is contaminated. I'm sure that wealthy people had enough casks of wine to hold them through. But at that time in history, if your whole country's blanketed in ash, then a lot of people aren't going to make it. Now, like I said, there could have been multiple calamities going on. This could have been a volcano and a comet, but could a comet alone account for all of this? Well, let's look at this paper from astrophysicists at Harvard EDU, and they make mention of records saying the sun appeared like the moon. Just so you know, this was for 18 months, so there were no crops grown for 2 years, basically. And based off the tree ring data, they estimate a decrease of 3 degrees Celsius mean temperature. And they make the assumption that the entire comet was destroyed in an airburst, which we'll talk about in just a second. The debris is then spread around the globe roughly uniformly, and then they go into their calculations. Long story short, their conclusion was the surprising result of just how small a comet fragment was needed to cause the observed effect. A comet less than a kilometer in diameter has not been previously considered to represent a global hazard, let alone one of a half kilometer. Now, they're not saying conclusively that it was a comet or meteor at 536, just that it would only require a half kilometer one. I've had a lot of comments over the years, and it's not been lost on me, about meteor craters, so-called. The problem with these are that they're almost perfectly round, or at least symmetrical. Now, what are the odds that some object comes flying in 20,000 miles an hour and impacts at a perfect 90 degree? I've seen a lot of these things, and they all come streaking in at an angle. And thanks everybody for pointing out that some of these were slowed down. I get tunnel vision sometime, and I'm just dumb. But just about every one of them that I've seen is an airburst. This is the Chelyabinsk airburst from 10 years ago. I've had a lot of people tell me that it's plasma, there's no solid object, and I have to disagree. This one is quarter sawn, and you see the burnt part on top. A lot of them are iron, but some are made up of very rare materials, and these go for hundreds of thousands of dollars. There are professional meteorite hunters that go out and find these. So I don't think people are spending that kind of money on river rock, even if you melt it somehow. So it seems to me if these come in at an angle, then it would create a bit of a trench and throw a bunch of debris in the opposite direction. But I've never seen that on any of the meteor craters. So theory number one would be that it comes in, it air bursts, and then the shock wave going down creates the impact crater. The second would be that certain metal compositions are holding an electrical charge and it discharges like an arc welder just before impact. It's worth a video in itself just to look at impact craters and the landscape in general and compare it to arc welds like what you're looking at here. When you look into it, these marks line up pretty well. Theory 3 would be that these are caused by the sun, either an electrical induction, an arc, and there's your cosmic thunderbolt going all the way to the sun, or a big chunk of plasma flies off the sun and hits us. But once again, in that case, it's not likely to hit straight down at a 90-degree angle. Anyway, before I get too off track, let's get back to 536. This is an article by Live Science study leader Abbott of Columbia University at the American Geophysical Union, so all kinds of street cred here. Well, penguin cred anyway. Fragment of Halley's Comet hit Earth in 536, causing drought and famine, and started the Dark Ages, I might add. She says a piece of the famous Halley's Comet likely slammed into Earth, blasting so much dust into the atmosphere that it cooled the planet, and made humanity more susceptible to Justinian's plague, which the first-hand accounts, historical accounts that I'll get to in a minute, contributed to the stuff in the air. These are new results and definitely weren't published last time I was looking into this subject, but they found evidence of atmospheric dust for a 7-year period. High levels of tin were found in the dust. I've always heard iridium as well indicates a comet. It was done in the springtime, which points to the Eta Aquariid meteor shower, which is fragments from Halley's Comet in the past. They also calculate a 3 degrees Celsius temperature drop. And she says that it's likely there was also a small volcanic effect. But check this out. The major thing is that something hit the ocean. They found circumstantial evidence that Greenland's ice cores of tiny tropical marine organisms, specifically certain species of diatoms and silicoflagellates. For anybody that needs a touch up on their geography, Greenland is way up here. The equator, where you find tropical marine specimens, is down here. If there's an impact out here that sent a wave up to Greenland, then what happens to Africa, Spain, England, even the Mediterranean over here? Not only a wall of water, but it would probably trigger fault lines and a lot of seismic activity and leave cities looking like this. Only check this out. This is during the Italian Renaissance, so, 14th, 15th century. Here's a channel I like. I can't pronounce his name, but he goes in depth about the official history of Rome and says, yeah, Alaric invaded in 476, and then Theodoric was a Germanic king that basically just ruled over the Romans and let them keep being a sovereign state, and then goes into a slow decline. But in another video, I'll go into how we get all this information from the Renaissance period with all those secretive guys, and then you get book after book based off of those primary sources. And then by 1776, Edward Gibbons writes the definitive history of Rome, and nobody questions it anymore. But I have a problem with the city being in ruins in 536 AD, still being in ruins at the time of the Renaissance, 1100 years later, and the Western world being in the Dark Ages that whole time, while the Eastern Byzantine Empire flourished. How many famous Romans have you heard of? Now, how many famous Byzantines have you heard of? Probably 2. This is new. They picture the Roman Colosseum and mention a 443 shaker that took out a lot of towns in Italy. But the Roman Colosseum fell in a 1349 seismic event. So just imagine one of our football stadiums just sitting empty for 1,000 years and nobody salvaging it. Anyway, let me show you the first-hand accounts and the problems with the dating. That is the actual title of the book. If anybody wants to look it up, it was published in 1749 before they got their historiography together. That's who decides what the official narrative is. According to this book, there's a lot going on around that time. These are all separate accounts from different places, but they're using Scaligerian chronology. 2 medieval monks, well, not really, but they really were responsible for all of the dating of historical events. And, even Isaac Newton said that there is no way that these dates are correct. If you guys want to pause and read the bottom 4 lines, it's pretty graphic. But, basically Antioch had a terrible shake, buildings overturned, appeared a comet for 3 weeks, a famine that they go into graphic detail about. But there's absolutely nothing here for 536 that is a modern invention. But 540, a great comet, fiery battles with abundance of blood were seen in the air, followed by great inundations, mud flood. A quake traveled over the globe, swallowed Cyzicus, whatever that is. And then in 544, according to this, is when what we'd call Justinian's plague started. Demons in human shape appeared to many. Interesting. And this book goes on and on. And if anybody wants to look it up, we'll just skip forward here to this part where in Greece, many towns were overturned and the sea also broke in and overflowed many places. And when you go through and look at all of these on a map, which I've done in a video, you see that these are all side by side and they've just got the dates spread out. So my official static conclusion is that there was a comet. It caused seismic and volcanic activity, electrical storms, famine, and most likely the plague. Right here in plain English, they say water, mud, the air was corrupted. In Italy, Spain, and France, where it was most favorable, 2/3 of the people perished, and it was most severe at Rome. So even more people in Rome were gone. So just think about that. A big, huge, thriving city, and 80 or 90% of the population is gone in a short period of time. And in medieval and Renaissance times, they came up with a cover story. Why? Because if you're the papacy who had control of everything after that event, and you're trying to convince everybody that you're mankind's direct link to God, then it doesn't look very good when acts of God wipe out the whole population. And so Alaric probably did sack Rome. And then they just used this and blamed everything on it. It's not like they don't still spin every little event that happens. You know how it works now. But where now we have this visual I'm showing as our picture of the Visigoths, well, look at this painting in medieval times where it looks like a bunch of medieval knights for Alaric's army. And there's a lot more stuff like this out there. We'll get into that later in some flamenco. I think I've made a pretty strong case that an impact and earth change events were responsible for the Dark Ages. If you enjoyed it, smash that like button and I'll see you on the next one. Static out.